dropping behind enemy lines in complete darkness with over 100 pounds of gear strapped to your body meant the difference between life and death for a World War II American paratrooper. Today, we are cataloguing the exact, verified lethal arsenal and survival equipment carried by the US Airborne into occupied Europe. Kicking off our list, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper M2 helmet. This was the original specialized headgear designed specifically for airborne forces during the early stages of the war. It featured a standard steel shell, but was distinguished by fixed, semicircular metal D-bales welded to the sides. These bales were intended to hold the specialized airborne chin strap firmly in place during a jump. Unfortunately, the intense opening shock of the parachute often caused these rigid bales to snap off completely. Because of this critical flaw, it was primarily used during the Normandy invasions before being replaced. Next up is the upgraded US Airborne Paratrooper M1C helmet. Introduced later in 1944, this helmet was developed to solve the breakage issues of its predecessor. The military replaced the rigid D-bales with flexible, hinged swivel bales that could absorb kinetic energy. This simple modification allowed the kinstrap attachments to move freely during the violent shock of parachute deployment. It became the standard issue helmet for major late-war operations like Market Garden and Operation Varsity. The M1C remains one of the most iconic pieces of airborne equipment from the entire conflict. Moving right along, let us look at the US Airborne Paratrooper M1942 jump jacket. This distinctive uniform piece was crafted from unlined, light olive drab cotton twill and designed specifically for the needs of a paratrooper. It featured 4 large bellowed patch pockets with snap button flaps, providing massive storage capacity for survival gear and ammunition. To prevent the pockets from tearing open during a jump, riggers often reinforced the seams with heavy canvas. It also included a unique dual-zippered knife pocket placed perfectly on the upper lapel for emergency access. Despite being iconic, it was eventually phased out by the warmer M1943 field uniform late in the war. Continuing with the uniform, we examine the US Airborne Paratrooper M1942 jump trousers. Made from the same durable cotton twill as the jacket, these trousers were tailored for the physical demands of airborne combat. The most prominent features were the massive bellowed cargo pockets located on the outer thighs. These pockets allowed soldiers to carry extra rations, grenades, and medical supplies directly on their legs. Because these heavy pockets tended to blow out during a jump, troops often tied them tightly to their legs using canvas straps. This reinforced baggy design gave the airborne troops a completely unique silhouette compared to standard infantrymen. Let us shift our focus down to the US Airborne Paratrooper Corcoran russet leather jump boots. These highly prized calf-length boots were perhaps the ultimate status symbol of the American airborne soldier. They were constructed from high-quality russet brown leather and featured a reinforced toe and heel for maximum protection upon landing. The tall 10-inch lace design provided critical ankle support, which was absolutely necessary to prevent severe injuries during high-impact parachute drops. Paratroopers would obsessively polish these boots, taking immense pride in their elite specialized footwear. Even when standard infantry combat boots were issued later, many paratroopers refused to give up their beloved Corcorans. Next on our breakdown is the US Airborne Paratrooper 48-star American Flag Invasion Armband. This temporary identification marker was heavily utilized during the chaotic airborne drops into Normandy, France. It was printed on a simple piece of oilcloth and pinned or sewn directly to the right shoulder of the jump jacket. The primary purpose of this brightly colored flag was to prevent friendly fire incidents among Allied forces and the French resistance. Because paratroopers were operating behind enemy lines in absolute darkness, clear and immediate national identification was a matter of survival. Though a small detail, this armband became a legendary symbol of the liberation of Europe. Web gear and equipment. Moving into the web gear, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper M1936 canvas field suspenders. These heavy-duty canvas straps were absolutely vital for for distributing the immense weight of the paratroopers' combat load. They connected directly to the pistol or cartridge belt, shifting the burden of ammunition and water from the waist to the shoulders. Without these suspenders, the sheer weight of a fully loaded webbing set would have pulled the soldiers' trousers down during combat. They featured adjustable buckles and padded shoulders to provide a minimal amount of comfort during long foot patrols. This robust harness system formed the absolute foundation of the American airborne loadout. Let us continue with the US Airborne Paratrooper M1936 canvas musette bag. Unlike standard infantry who carried large cumbersome haversacks on their backs, paratroopers were issued this versatile, compact bag. It clipped directly to the M1936 suspenders, resting high on the shoulders to avoid interfering with the main parachute harness. Inside, a soldier would stuff his personal items, extra socks, spare rations, and highly necessary extra ammunition. Because of its practical size, many mechanized troops and officers also tried to acquire this highly coveted bag. It served as the primary rucksack for the airborne soldier from the jump into Normandy all the way to the end of the war. Now we look at a highly specialized item, the US Airborne Paratrooper rigor-made canvas ammunition pouches. Because standard military issue gear often failed to meet the extreme demands of airborne warfare, parachute riggers manufactured their own custom solutions. These pouches were heavily stitched from durable scrap canvas and designed specifically to hold Thompson Submachine Gun or M1 Garand magazines. They were typically designed with tie-down straps, allowing the soldier to secure the heavy ammunition directly against his chest or waist. This prevented the magazines from violently flailing around and causing injury during the sudden shock of a parachute opening. These custom pouches are a perfect example of airborne units adapting and overcoming standard supply limitations. Next up is the US Airborne Paratrooper M1 aluminum canteen. Hydration was a critical concern for soldiers fighting miles away from established supply lines, making this item absolutely indispensable. It held exactly 1/4 water and was constructed from seamless aluminum to prevent leaks and endure heavy combat abuse. The canteen featured a threaded aluminum cap secured by a small chain so it could not be lost in the mud or darkness. Airborne troops often carried 2 or more of these canteens on their webbing because securing clean drinking water behind enemy lines was incredibly difficult. It is a simple, humble piece of gear, yet it was vital for keeping the isolated soldier combat effective. Moving on to medical gear, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper M1942 Carlisle First Aid Pouch. This small canvas pouch was securely attached to the soldier's pistol belt or suspenders for immediate one-handed access. Inside, it contained a single sterile dressing designed to immediately stop severe bleeding from shrapnel or bullet wounds. The dressing was heavily compressed and wrapped in a waterproof brass or copper tin to protect it from the elements. Paratroopers were trained to use this dressing on themselves or their comrades to stabilize a wound until a combat medic could arrive. This simple pouch undoubtedly saved thousands of lives during the chaotic, scattered firefights of the airborne drops. Let us transition to field gear with the US Airborne Paratrooper M1943 Folding and Trenching Tool. Replacing the older fixed-blade shovels, this highly engineered tool was a masterpiece of military design for compact carry. It featured a folding steel blade that could be locked straight out as a shovel or locked at a right angle to be used as a heavy pick or hoe. The wooden handle was durable, and the entire assembly folded down compactly to be stored in a canvas carrier on the web belt. Digging a foxhole quickly was the only way to survive heavy artillery barrages, making this tool a paratrooper's best friend. In desperate, close-quarters combat, the sharpened steel edge of the shovel was also utilized as a devastating melee weapon. Next on the manifest is the US Airborne Paratrooper M5 Levium-7 Assault Gas Mask. Although chemical weapons were never deployed on a massive scale in the European theatre, High Command mandated that all troops carry gas protection. This specific assault mask was highly favored by the airborne because it was significantly smaller and lighter than the standard infantry service mask. It featured a waterproof, rubberized facepiece and a compact filter canister that attached directly to the cheek. Paratroopers stored this mask in a black rubberized bag, which they often repurposed to carry extra ammunition or personal items once they realized a gas attack was unlikely. Despite being mostly dead weight, it was a mandatory piece of invasion gear that every single jumper had to strap on. Parachute and insertion gear. Continuing into insertion gear, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper T5 main parachute assembly. This was the primary lifeline for the American airborne soldier, carrying him from the transport plane safely down to the battlefield. It featured a massive 28-foot canopy made of highly durable camouflage or white nylon, packed tightly into a heavy canvas deployment bag. The system operated on a static line, meaning a sturdy woven strap was hooked to a cable inside the plane, which automatically pulled the parachute open as the soldier jumped. The resulting opening shock was incredibly violent, often described by veterans as feeling like being hit by a truck in mid-air. Once safely on the ground, the soldier had to quickly unbuckle the heavy chest and leg straps to free himself for combat. Right alongside the main canopy, we must examine the US Airborne Paratrooper T5 Reserve Parachute Assembly. Because the automatic static line main parachute was not entirely fail-proof, every jumper was required to wear this secondary 24-foot canopy. It was clipped directly to the front of the main harness, resting heavily across the paratrooper's chest and stomach. If the main canopy failed to open or tangle during the descent, the soldier had to manually pull the ripcord on this chest pack. While incredibly dangerous to deploy at the low altitudes favored by combat drops, it provided a psychological safety net for terrified soldiers plunging into the darkness. Upon landing, many troops quickly discarded the heavy reserve or used the pristine white silk and nylon to construct improvised tents. Moving to weapon transport, let us look at the US Airborne Paratrooper Griswold weapons bag. Because the M1 Garand rifle was too long to jump with safely while assembled, the military issued this heavily padded canvas case. The soldier would break his rifle down into two pieces, slide them into the protective sleeve, and snap it securely shut. The bag was then strapped tightly to the parachute harness or attached to a webbing drop line so it would hit the ground just before the soldier. While it protected the weapon perfectly, it meant the paratrooper was effectively unarmed for the first terrifying minutes while he scrambled to reassemble his rifle in the dark. It is a prime example of the unique logistical hurdles faced by airborne infantry. Next in line is the infamous US Airborne Paratrooper Canvas Leg Drop Bag. As airborne equipment grew heavier, the military created this large canvas sack to allow soldiers to carry extra heavy weapons, radios, and medical supplies. The paratrooper would strap this incredibly heavy bag to his right leg, intending to lower it on a 20-foot rope just before hitting the ground. Unfortunately, the sheer weight of these bags, combined with the massive opening shock of the parachute, caused disastrous failures during the Normandy drops. Thousands of these bags tore away completely, plunging to the earth and leaving paratroopers stranded without their heavy machine guns, mortars, or radios. Because of this massive design failure, it is remembered as one of the most detested pieces of gear in airborne history. Let us shift to a much smaller tool with the US Airborne Paratrooper ACME Cricket Signaling Clicker. This tiny, inexpensive brass and steel noisemaker is arguably the most famous piece of specialized airborne equipment from the D-Day invasions. Because paratroopers were deliberately scattered across miles of dark, enemy-held territory, they needed a stealthy way to identify friend from foe. A soldier would click the device once, and the required friendly response was 2 distinct clicks in return. If a shape in the darkness did not respond with the 2 clicks, the soldier knew instantly to open fire. While highly effective for the first few days of combat, German troops quickly learned the trick, rendering the tool obsolete shortly after the initial invasion. Weapons and bladed tools. Transitioning into our weapons list, we examine the US Airborne Paratrooper M1 Garand 30 caliber rifle. This semi-automatic powerhouse was the standard infantry weapon of the American forces and provided a massive firepower advantage on the battlefield. Firing a heavy .30-06 cartridge from an 8-round N-block clip, it allowed airborne squads to lay down suppressive fire against enemies armed largely with slower bolt-action rifles. It was famously robust, functioning perfectly even after being dropped into the muddy swamps and flooded fields of Normandy. Although it was large and difficult to jump with, its unmatched reliability and long-range stopping power made it a favorite among the scattered airborne troops. It is widely considered by military historians to be the greatest battle implement of the entire conflict. Next on the arsenal breakdown is the US Airborne Paratrooper M1A 130 caliber folding stock carbine. Designed specifically to solve the mobility problems of the airborne forces, this lightweight weapon replaced the standard pistol for officers and support troops. It featured a highly distinctive tubular steel folding stock with a cast aluminum buttplate, allowing the weapon to be strapped securely to a paratrooper's leg. It fired a smaller pistol caliber cartridge from a 15-round box magazine, offering significantly less recoil than the full-sized Garand. While it lacked extreme long-range lethality, its compact size made it absolutely devastating in the tight, close-quarters fighting of the French hedgerows. This carbine perfectly illustrates the specialized engineering required to arm soldiers dropping from transport planes. Let us continue our firepower review with the US Airborne Paratrooper M1A1 Thompson Submachine Gun. This legendary heavy-hitting automatic weapon was issued heavily to airborne squad leaders, non-commissioned officers and assault teams. Chambered for the massive 45 ACP pistol cartridge, it delivered unparalleled knockdown power when clearing enemy trenches or urban buildings. The M1A1 variant was simplified for mass production, utilizing straight 20 or 30-round stick magazines instead of the bulky, unreliable drums from the Prohibition era. Despite weighing over 10 pounds when fully loaded, its sheer volume of lead gave isolated paratroopers a terrifying edge in sudden, violent firefights. It remains one of the most visually iconic and respected firearms ever carried by American forces. Moving to sidearms, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper M1911 A145 caliber semi-automatic pistol. This legendary handgun was the standard issue secondary weapon for officers, medics, and heavy machine gun crews throughout the Airborne Divisions. It operated on a reliable short recoil system and fed from a 7-round detachable box magazine inserted securely into the grip. The massive 45 caliber slug was renowned for its immediate stopping power, designed to neutralize a threat with a single close-range shot. Paratroopers preferred to carry it in a leather hip holster or a specialized leather shoulder rig to keep it clear of their parachute harness. Built like a tank, this sidearm saved countless lives when primary weapons jammed or ran out of ammunition in desperate situations. Next up is the brutal US Airborne Paratrooper M3 trench knife. Developed specifically for soldiers who were not issued a bayonet, this dedicated combat blade was standard issue for airborne troops carrying carbines and submachine guns. It featured a 6 3/4-inch spearpoint steel blade, optimized entirely for lethal thrusting in close-quarters combat. The handle was constructed from deeply grooved, stacked leather washers to ensure a non-slick grip even when covered in mud or blood. A heavy steel pommel cap on the base was stamped with an Ordnance flaming bomb and doubled as a devastating blunt force striking tool. Troops typically strapped the leather or fiberglass scabbard, holding this knife directly to their ankle or webbing for instant access in a trench fight. Let us examine another crucial blade, the US Airborne Paratrooper M2 Parachutist Switchblade Knife. Unlike the heavy trench knife, this was primarily a piece of life-saving survival gear rather than an offensive combat weapon. It was engineered so a soldier trapped in a tree or tangled under a submerged parachute could deploy the blade instantly with just one hand. By pressing a highly responsive button on the grip, The spring-loaded blade snapped open and locked firmly into place. It featured a metal bail at the base, allowing troops to tie it on a lanyard to their jacket zipper, so it could never be dropped during an emergency. The ability to instantly cut through thick nylon parachute suspension lines made this automatic knife an absolute necessity for every jumper. Ordnance and explosives. Transitioning into our explosives category, we look at the US Airborne Paratrooper Mark II fragmentation hand grenade. Universally recognized as the pineapple grenade due to its heavily textured cast-iron body, it was the standard explosive thrown by all American infantrymen. The deep external grooves were designed to help the casing shatter into uniform, highly lethal fragments, though it often broke into unpredictable, jagged chunks of iron. It utilized a chemical time delay fuse that gave the soldier approximately 4 to 5 seconds to seek cover after releasing the safety spoon. The lethal radius of the flying shrapnel was roughly 10 to 15 yards, making it incredibly effective for clearing out bunkers and fortified farmhouses. Airborne troops frequently carried multiple of these deadly devices dangling from their web gear or stuffed into their cargo pockets. Next, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper No. 82 Garand grenade. This highly unique weapon was actually of British design, but was issued extensively to American airborne forces because they lacked sufficient anti-tank bazookas on D-Day. It consisted of a flexible fabric bag attached to an impact fuse, which the paratrooper would manually pack with raw plastic explosives in the field. By adjusting the amount of explosive material in the bag, the soldier could scale the blast to destroy anything from a light wooden bunker to a heavily armored German tank. When thrown, a weighted cloth ribbon would unfurl, removing the safety pin and arming the highly sensitive contact fuse in mid-air. Because the bag deformed upon striking a target, it transferred maximum explosive energy directly into the enemy armor plating. Moving along, let us review the US Airborne Paratrooper Mark II Hawkins Mine. This was another piece of British-designed ordnance, eagerly adopted by the heavily outgunned American paratroopers for anti-vehicular defense. It was a compact, rectangular flask packed with high explosives that could be utilized as either a thrown anti-tank grenade or a buried landmine. To use it as a mine, the soldiers simply placed a chemical crush igniter on the top plate and buried it likely in the dirt road. When the heavy steel tracks of an enemy tank rolled over the plate, it crushed the igniter, setting off a massive localized explosion that severed the track. Because they were relatively lightweight and easy to pack, airborne squads relied heavily on these improvised mines to block enemy armored counterattacks. Continuing our explosive breakdown, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper Composition C explosive block. This putty-like plastic explosive was a revolutionary advancement in demolition technology during the Second World War. Unlike traditional dynamite, Composition C was highly stable, waterproof, and could be molded by hand like clay to fit perfectly against a target. Airborne demolition specialists used these heavy blocks to blow up critical enemy infrastructure, including railroad tracks, communication lines, and massive concrete bridge supports. It was completely insensitive to shock or gunfire, requiring a dedicated blasting cap and time fuse to actually trigger the detonation. The ability to carry immense moldable destructive power in a small canvas bag gave the airborne forces a highly lethal strategic capability. Survival, rations and miscellaneous. Transitioning into survival and rations, let us look at the US Airborne Paratrooper Type K ration. Because airborne troops could not rely on field kitchens or immediate supply drops, they had to carry their own highly condensed combat meals. The K ration was packaged in a heavily wax-coated cardboard box to protect the contents from water damage and poison gas. It provided 3 distinct meals per day: breakfast, dinner, and supper, each containing canned meat, highly dense biscuits, instant coffee, and small luxury items like cigarettes and chewing gum. While calorically dense, the constant consumption of these dry, repetitive rations led to severe weight loss and digestive issues among the frontline troops. Nevertheless, this compact brick of food was an absolute logistical marvel that kept isolated soldiers alive behind enemy lines. Next on the menu is the US Airborne Paratrooper Type D Ration Survival Chocolate Bar. This was not a pleasant candy bar designed for morale, but rather an emergency survival ration engineered strictly for extreme caloric density. It was made from a highly concentrated mixture of chocolate, sugar, oat flour, and vitamins, resulting in an incredibly hard, bitter block. The military intentionally made it taste slightly worse than a boiled potato so that starving soldiers would not eat it casually as a snack. It contained 600 calories and was designed to sustain a soldier's energy for a full day if all other food supplies were exhausted or lost during the jump. Troops often had to shave it with their combat knives just to chew it, but it undoubtedly saved lives in desperate situations. Moving to utility gear, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper TL-122 Angle Head Flashlight. Operating in absolute darkness required reliable illumination, and this iconic right-angle flashlight was standard issue for officers, medics, and radiomen. Its unique bent neck design allowed the paratrooper to clip it securely to his chest webbing, providing a hands-free beam of light while reading a map or treating a wound. It featured a durable plastic or metal casing and utilized a switch that allowed for Morse code signaling through short bursts of light. Many models included interchangeable colored lenses stored in the base, with the red lens being highly favored to preserve night vision on combat patrols. This rugged piece of illumination technology became a staple of the American military for decades following the war. Next, we examine a critical navigation tool, the US Airborne Paratrooper M1938 Lensatic Compass. When paratroopers were inevitably scattered miles away from their designated drop zones, knowing exactly which direction to march was absolutely vital. This precision instrument featured a durable cast aluminum case, a damping mechanism to stabilize the needle, and a magnifying lens for highly accurate map reading. The compass dial was painted with radium, allowing it to glow brightly in the dark, so officers could navigate without turning on a flashlight and alerting the enemy. It was typically carried in a small canvas pouch hooked securely to the pistol belt or heavily guarded in a jump jacket pocket. Without this reliable navigation aid, isolated units would have wandered aimlessly through the deadly maze of the French countryside. Let us continue with a somber but necessary item, the US Airborne Paratrooper Identification Tags, commonly known as dog tags. Every single soldier was issued a pair of these stamped metal rectangles, worn constantly around the neck on a beaded chain or cotton cord. They were mechanically stamped with the soldier's name, serial number, blood type, and religious preference to assist medical personnel and graves registration. Paratroopers often taped their dog tags together or placed rubber silencers around the edges to prevent them from clinking loudly during stealthy night patrols. If a soldier was killed in action, one tag remained with the body, while the second tag was collected for official military record keeping. These simple pieces of stamped metal represented the ultimate personal sacrifice made by the young men of the Airborne Divisions. Finally, concluding our extensive catalogue, we have the US Airborne Paratrooper Zippo Lighter. While not an official piece of government-issued military ordnance, nearly every soldier purchased or acquired one of these legendary wind-proof lighters. The rugged steel casing and reliable flint wheel ignition system meant it sparked perfectly even in the driving rain and mud of the European theatre, beyond simply lighting the ubiquitous combat ration cigarettes. Paratroopers used them to ignite demolition fuses, sterilize medical needles, and provide momentary illumination in dark bunkers. Soldiers frequently customized their lighters, engraving them with their airborne unit insignias, dates of major battles, or the names of loved ones waiting back home. This small personal item provided a tiny source of comfort and utility in the harshest combat environments imaginable. Impart this in 3 pieces.